tncradio.live, your commercial driver navigation station.
Good afternoon. This is tncradio.live, and this is the Truckers Network Radio Show with your host, Shelley Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Yes, this is the Truckers Network Radio Show on tncradio.live, where we offer the entertainment, sports, weather, traffic, news, and information that commercial drivers want to hear. Chronic health issues are often too much of a harsh reality for drivers with the long hours they keep and the rigors of their jobs. Interestingly, there's research that shows a person's personality or emotional type dictates the kind of chronic health conditions the person will have. Today we have Michael Jauer, who co-authored a book with Dr. Marc Micozzi called Your Emotional Type, Keys to the Therapies That Will Work for You. Michael Jauer is a Washington, D.C.-based writer, speaker, and researcher. His expertise is the causal link of personality development, body, mind, emotion, and spirituality. Michael has co-authored 2 other books with Dr. Micozzi. Michael writes for Psychology Today and has written papers for Scientific American, Frontiers in Psychology Consciousness Research, the Journal of Interpersonal Neurobiology Studies, seminars in integrative medicine, and advances in mind-body medicine, just to name a few. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, Shelley. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope just because I live in the Washington, D.C. area, your listeners won't automatically dismiss everything I have to
say. Good point. Good point. He's not one of those D.C. people. Not one of those.
No, absolutely not.
This is all very intriguing. Certain emotional types are prone to different health conditions. If you wouldn't mind telling us more, how does all of this work, and how did you happen upon this revelation?
Well, it was a gradual process. I have to say that I'm somebody who's not naturally inclined to know what he's feeling really well, as my wife and kids can attest. I will sort of get into a temper and not realize how I got there. And this is after years of studying emotions, so it's a tough nut to crack. So I think that's part of the reason, Shelley, that I'm actually interested in this subject is it doesn't come naturally to me. But feelings are so important. They're so critical. They're really the best possible barometer of how we're doing in any given situation, how we're feeling about life in general, how we're feeling about particular people, what's going on in any particular situation or encounter we might have. And the concept that I want to introduce your listeners to is called boundaries, thick and thin boundaries. And it's an aspect of personality not a lot of people know about. Most people are familiar with, introversion and extroversion, how shy or outgoing somebody is. But this is a different approach, and I think it really helps to explain a lot about people and a lot about how we're doing and how we could be doing better. So you can imagine a spectrum, a continuum of what we call boundaries, and it's basically the ease with which someone is affected by stimuli. So on one end of the spectrum, the highly thin side of the boundary spectrum, you have people that are highly sensitive, that react very quickly to things that are said, things that are done. We all know people that fly off, the handle at a moment's notice. These are people who are highly reactive, who have long memories of slights and stuff that happened to them. It could be, good stuff too. That for them, these memories, the emotional memories, are very, very present. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the highly thick boundary people for whom feelings are almost like a foreign language. So these are folks who really don't know at any given moment, or really couldn't say precisely what they're feeling. And emotional memories don't have the same kind of pull with them as they do for highly thin boundary people. Then, of course, you have everybody in the middle. And like most things in this life, it's a bell curve that reflects the distribution of people along the spectrum. So most people are somewhere in the middle. You kind of imagine a bell shape, and fewer people towards each end of the spectrum. But I think this concept of thick versus thin and how reactive we are really goes a long way to explaining how we get along, and the contribution that Dr. Micozzi and I have made is really illustrating the effect on personal health.
Now, do these thin boundaries versus thick boundaries evolve through environment growing up, or is it something that a person's born with?
It's nature and it's nurture.
Okay.
We certainly get all kinds of traits from our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents all down the line. That's real. I mean, that's certainly, we're all equal according to the Constitution in the eyes of God. However, we're very different. Each one of us has different preferences, different inclinations, different capabilities, different strengths and weaknesses. A lot of that comes through our inheritance, and a lot of it comes through the examples that we see and absorb as we get older, as we grow. And it's not just parents; it's teachers, it's family, friends. It's a big mix, and it's really tough to kind of tease out. Well, is it more nature? Is it more nurture? I prefer to think of it as just a big mix, and it's like saying, what's the most important side of a square or of a rectangle, the length or the width? Well, neither. I mean, they both make it a rectangle, so we're a product of both.
Now, the various emotional types that you define, the thin versus thick boundary, what kind of health conditions typically accompany the different personalities?
Well, it helps to think, again, of the reactivity of people when you consider the kinds of conditions that affect different people, and also want to get into this a little bit with you later on, the kinds of therapies that are most helpful depending on where a person is on the boundary spectrum. Mm-hmm. But for example, thick boundary people who, as I say, are not terribly conversant with their feelings, it doesn't mean that they feel their feelings any less. It just means that they're not accessible as immediately to them. So a good example of this is ulcer. Ulcer is a very typical thick boundary condition, and it signals that something's wrong. Obviously, very painful and problematic, but it kind of seeps in there, and it reflects the kind of anxiety and stress and reaction to anxiety and stress that a person isn't 100% conscious of. So, ulcer is a good example of a thick boundary condition. Another good example is chronic fatigue syndrome that probably some of your listeners have heard of. Mm-hmm. Chronic fatigue syndrome typically affects women more than men, and I think that ulcer probably affects men more than women. So this is not, a typically a thing that's easy to say. It's, well, one gender is affected more than another. Although when you look at thin boundary people, women are more likely to be thin boundary, and men are more likely to be thick boundary. But like I say, everybody's different. Those are just generalities. And then when you look at the thin boundary side, examples of illnesses or health conditions that affect thin boundary people are, number one, allergies. Thin boundary people are highly allergic. And migraine headache is another good example of that. And then an intriguing example, because it cuts both ways, is PTSD, mm-hmm. is post-traumatic stress disorder. And most people think of PTSD as kind of an immediate reaction, to something in the environment that reminds someone of being back on the battlefield, something like that. A car, right. Backfires or something, and the person is back on the battlefield. And so it's an immediate reaction. You'd think, well, that's 100% thin boundary. And that's true in most cases. Probably about 70% of PTSD cases, the individuals are on the thin side of the spectrum, but about 30% are thick boundary people. So that if that same car backfires or something, something happens that triggers a recollection, they're not immediately back on the battlefield. There's something that's kind of nagging at them. They feel not quite right. Something is amiss, but they can't put their finger on it. And it's what we would call a more dissociative form of PTSD, where it's just the feelings are distanced. They're dissociated. and that's in the case for about 30% of people that suffer from PTSD.
Very interesting. I want to be able to delve into this further, and we're going to be having to go to break, and I don't want to interrupt your train of thought because this is really deep stuff, but it's really, really going to offer, I think, our drivers some tremendous insight. We're talking with Michael Jower, who co-authored a book with Dr. Marc Micozzi called Your Emotional Type, Keys to the Therapies That Will Work With You. Also Boundaries, Thick and Thin Boundaries. Very interesting stuff here. I think that we're going to learn a lot and maybe be able to improve people's health. This would be excellent. This is the Truckers Network radio show here on tncradio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up.
This info blog on tncradio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. 3 simple tips to improve your CSA score. There are millions of drivers on the road every day. That's why trucking companies must stay compliant with federal safety regulations. Staying compliant with federal safety regulations not only helps keep yourself and others on the road safe, but also helps improve your safety scores. A good CSA score is extremely important to the success of a trucking company. Drivers that have a good score have access to preferred loads and reduced insurance rates. Here's some tips on how to improve your CSA score. What is the CSA program? CSA, Compliance, Safety, Accountability, is a program of the FMCSA that holds truck drivers accountable for their role in safety. The main goal of the CSA program is to prevent accidents from happening on the road and to identify high-risk commercial motor carriers. Although the FMCSA runs the CSA program, they don't issue CSA scores. The FMCSA created an online safety measurement system that records data like roadside inspections and crash reports from the last 2 years. The data is updated monthly and assigned to your DOT number. The FMCSA then organizes the SMS data into 7 categories, often referred to as basics: behavior, analysis, and safety improvement. How to improve your CSA score? When it comes to CSA scores, the lower the scores, the better. Your CSA score determines whether or not you'll get a visit from the DOT. Over time, your CSA score can be improved by making safety a core focus of your trucking company. Prioritize pre-trip inspections. A large percentage of CSA violations are truck-related. This could all be prevented with a pre-trip inspection. Pre-trip inspections are one of the most important things you need to do before any trip. A simple pre-trip inspection helps you get in tune with your truck before you drive. It lets you know if anything's wrong with the truck or needs to be fixed before hitting the road. Not only are you required by law to perform a pre-trip inspection, but it also keeps you and others safe while on the road. Check out our blog, 4 Reasons Why Pre-Trip Inspections Are Important for Truck Drivers. Be more cautious of who you hire. Hiring drivers with a good driving record is crucial if you want to have a good CSA score. Remember that CSA scores use your driver's crash records to calculate your score. So if you hire a driver with a bad driving history, you're taking on more of a risk. Challenge citations. You have at least 2 years to challenge a violation. If you challenge a violation and it gets dismissed, it'll be removed from your company's CSA score. The Truckers Network has teamed up with CDL Consultants and CDL 360 to provide a full spectrum of safety, compliance, and audit services to our members. CDL Consultants has successfully reduced or dismissed over 35,000 violations and tickets. They've worked with tens of thousands of drivers and companies, including many top 100 carriers. If you need to fight a violation, search for a CDL Consultant on the Truckers Network webpage at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
Want to advertise on tncradio.live? Take advantage of great discounts for 2021. Check out the sponsors page at tncradio.live or send an email to info@tncradio.live. This is the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson here with Tom Kelly, and we're talking with Michael Jower, who's co-authored a book with Dr. Marc Micozzi called Your Emotional Type and Keys to the Therapies That Will Work for You. Michael, you've got some very interesting concepts here, and I think it's very insightful. different personality, thin or thick boundary people, as you said. What chronic conditions typically impact people on the thin or thick boundary sides?
Right. So there are 12 that we've zeroed in on, Dr. Micozzi and I, and in alphabetical order, there are asthma, almost alphabetical order. Allergies actually come before asthma. Chronic fatigue, I mentioned before. Depression is a big one in this country. Fibromyalgia, which is chronic pain. Hypertension. Irritable bowel syndrome. Migraines, I mentioned those before. PTSD, I mentioned. Psoriasis, and I'll add eczema as skin conditions. So that's actually together 12 illnesses that are very much affected by the state of a person's feeling, how they're reacting to stresses and strains in their life.
Now, what about the thick boundary side, where people are not as aware of their emotions and maybe they're not as mercurial?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Well, this kind of gets to the other part of what Marc and I have published and have delved into is the kinds of treatments, especially what's been known as complementary and alternative medical care, CAM, complementary and alternative medicine, although hopefully it's not as alternative as it was 10 or 20 years ago. But these are therapies like acupuncture, hypnosis, biofeedback, meditation, yoga, guided imagery, and different kind of relaxation techniques. These are well-documented approaches that help people, especially with any kind of an illness that has an emotional component, where it really helps to be able to relax or take some sort of other approach beyond drugs or surgery. And I'll give you an example. Thick boundary folks, you could imagine that they would respond better to a more hands-on approach, such as acupuncture or biofeedback. And biofeedback is a terrific example because people can actually see on a screen in front of them how their body is responding as they're brought through whatever the regimen is to zero in on trying to reduce the pain or discomfort. So that's a terrific example of a thick boundary person being able to see and experience something more directly, whereas a thin boundary person is going to respond typically better to a treatment that's more imagery-based because they're able to visualize much more quickly, typically, especially emotional imagery, so that hypnosis or guided imagery is going to be really good for a thin boundary person. And then I think I mentioned the importance of relaxation, and that's going to benefit anybody and everybody, so that practices like meditation or yoga or mindfulness-based stress reduction, those kind of relaxation techniques are going to benefit virtually everyone.
Now, would thick boundary people be less likely to develop some of the chronic health conditions that the emotional person could develop? I'm just wondering if too many emotions could be really bad for the body. I'm just trying to make a correlation here, I guess.
Yeah, I think a good way, Shelley, to picture this is emotions, the word emotion. You know, your listeners can hear the movement in the word, emote. It's the movement of energy in the body. And anything that anybody feels at any given time is important. Not all of it becomes conscious. There's a lot of feelings that we have that aren't conscious. For example, my family knows that I typically will get cranky if I haven't eaten something, and I'm not really conscious that I'm hungry. And at a certain point, it becomes conscious, and I'm like, hey, I really need to have a sandwich right now, and I'm cranky until I get that sandwich. So it's a very pedestrian example, but there's lots of feelings that we have in any given moment. Typically, they're unconscious because our body is just doing what it's doing. you're not conscious of typically of your digestion after a meal, or your pulse rate, for example, or your body temperature, and yet you can be in certain circumstances. So a lot of this is not really conscious, but all of these feelings are important, and the energy of feelings is crucial to understanding how they work. And to answer your question, being thick or thin, it's not a case of one is better than another, or one is more problematic than another. There are plenty of these conditions that thin boundary people are prone to. There are plenty of conditions that thick boundary people are prone to. I think a key is to know where you are on the spectrum, and to realize why some of these different treatments might be better for you than conventional, drugs or talk therapy. And I just want to mention on our website, folks can take a very quick quiz. It's a 10-minute quiz. It's tabulated automatically, and you can see where you are on this boundary spectrum. You go to www.youremotionaltype.com, and you'll immediately see a graphic of the quiz. It's called the Boundary Quiz. It's 18 questions, and in my experience, it's 10 or 12 minutes to take the quiz, and within 15 minutes you can see where you are on the spectrum.
Interesting. Yes, I just wanted to clarify for our listeners that what the differences were between thin and thick boundary people, and whether or not there were physical ailments one or the other were more prone to, but getting clarification that the therapies that they choose, that's the key here to help with the particular condition. And it's rather interesting that I guess conventional doctors have not noticed this. Is it because they're just taught this is a certain way to do things and that's what you do, or?
Yes, I believe that most doctors they're trained in a system that focuses on the symptoms. It's what right. People are walking into the doctor's office or calling them or doing a telehealth visit and saying, this is bothering me. However, there's a lot that's underneath and around that complaint. It's not just the symptoms. Well, what led to the symptoms? In my case, just taking this kind of dumb little example, I'm cranky. Why am I cranky? Because I haven't eaten. Well, why haven't I eaten? Because I've gotten absorbed in something that, got my attention for a while. So how can I fix that? So it's a small little example, but it kind of gets to an approach that I really favor and have learned a lot about in the last several years, and that's patient-centered healthcare. The idea that we are more than our symptoms, and doctors are trained in a system that focuses on that symptomatology and, what is the answer for that particular symptom, but it's going to run the risk of ignoring the person and the lived experience behind those symptoms.
It's interesting. I'm seeing more patient-centered healthcare as the phrase that's being bantered about. But I'm wondering if all of the doctors and in the advertising, if it's actually being practiced. Do the doctors know what that means?
It's a great question, and it's getting there slowly, and I hope surely. I worked with an office for several years, not directly for them, but in collaboration with an office called the Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation within the VA. And it's a terrific office. It's directed and staffed by really competent and well-intentioned people, both in Washington, D.C. and in locations throughout the country. And they've established what they call whole health centers, where these types of treatments are available. And in many cases, if they're not available at the particular VA location, if the docs are plugged in to patient-centered care, they can direct the patient to a contracted provider who can render those services. So it's part of the VA culture, and hopefully it's becoming more so. The problem with the term patient-centered care is, I think, people that don't really know what it means, it becomes a catchphrase, and so they begin to say, well, I'm practicing patient-centered medicine without really embracing it or understanding it 100%. It becomes a catchphrase. But
right.
As far as it being a parcel of what the VA is trying to do, it absolutely is within the system and should be proceeding that way even more.
patient-centered care would be more what, of a naturopathic doctor or maybe an osteopath and that sort of thing? That's been the area where it has been more widely embraced. Am I correct on that?
Yes, that's absolutely right. In fact, I represented the naturopathic profession here in Washington, D.C. for about 5 years. And any profession that is looking at people as complete human beings, especially their emotional experience, and not just, well, tell me your symptoms, what's bothering you, and I'll prescribe this medicine, and then you can get on your way. Anybody that is going to sit down with a patient and really, through a series of questions, get them to open up and just establish that rapport is going to be in a much better position to help that patient, and the patient's going to be in a much better position to get benefit from that interaction.
Great insight, and this is something that drivers need to know. And it's good to know that maybe things are starting to turn around where the medical community overall is starting to think in this direction, because we are more than our bodies and obviously our emotions. I mean, it just makes sense. Everything's interrelated, and there are certain things that would work better. Certainly, I think, as we know, anger, constant anger and being in the fight-flight response is really
absolutely
bad.
Right.
And that's an emotion.
Yes, and it can become, and it's a vicious circle. And so to know how to diffuse that, how to step back from it, how to be more mindful of it. I mean, there's certain bad habits that I'm in, or just certain habits, I won't necessarily label them bad, but just certain tendencies that I have that it's really helpful to be able to label them and say, okay, well, I'm doing that again, or I don't want to do that again. And so to have a little bit of distance is really important. So in that sense, the thick boundary people have maybe a little bit of advantage because they're not necessarily experiencing their feelings as intensively as the thin boundary people. On the other hand, the thin boundary people are more interested as a general matter in what they're feeling, and so they're going to be more likely to sort of try to decode, well, what does this dream mean, for example, whereas a thick boundary person, a dream won't necessarily mean anything to them.
Right. They're more in tune with things. So, and that's a good thing. We have to go to break here. This is some great insight, Michael. We're talking with Michael Jauer, who co-authored a book with Dr. Marc Micozzi called Your Emotional Type and Key to the Therapies That Will Work With You. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more great insight coming up.
This info blog on TNCRadio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. Spring is near. Cleaning tips for truck drivers. Spring's right around the corner. That means saying goodbye to the cold winter weather and hello to the warm sunshine. For many people, it's time to start spring cleaning at their house. For truckers, this could mean cleaning out their truck. It's not uncommon for truck drivers to spend more time on the road than in their house. Having a clean, organized truck can make life on the road much more enjoyable and less stressful. Here's some spring cleaning tips for truck drivers. Clean and organize. It's always a good idea to incorporate a cleaning routine into your work schedule. After all, your truck reflects who you are as a driver. A clean and well-organized truck can take a lot of stress out of your job as being a truck driver. It also makes you more prepared in the event of a DOT inspection. Take some time this spring to clean out and organize your truck. Throw away the trash, donate or get rid of things that are not a part of your daily use. Go through your paperwork and organize it. Finally, wipe down the inside of your truck. Get a wet cloth and wipe down your dash, air vents, and other areas you feel need cleaning. After you wipe everything down, pull out your vacuum and start vacuuming the carpets, floor mats, and vents. Wash and wax. The winter months can be hard on the exterior of a truck. All the snow and de-icing salts can make your truck look pretty rough. Start washing your truck from the top and work your way down. Use microfiber cloths to clean your windows and windshields. Maintenance. Failing to stay up to date on your truck's maintenance means you're less likely to spot a problem before it occurs. This can end up costing you a lot of money and time off from work. Not only do you save money and time by regularly performing maintenance on your truck, but you're also more likely to pass a roadside inspection. The spring season is a great time to perform a maintenance check on your truck. Check fluid levels and make sure your lights and windshield wipers are working. Snow and ice take a toll on brakes and tires. The transition from cold to warm weather can affect your tire pressure. Check your brakes and make sure they're not worn out. Be sure to check out the blog, 6 Easy Steps for Keeping Your Semi-Truck Interior Clean, from the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
To report possible human trafficking or to ask for help, call 888-3737-888.
Để báo cáo có thể có nạn buôn người hoặc yêu cầu giúp đỡ, hãy gọi 888 3737 888.
Para reportar una posible trata de personas o para pedir ayuda, llame al 888-3737-888.
This is the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly, and we're talking with Michael Jauer, who co-authored a book with Dr. Marc Micozzi called Your Emotional Type, Keys to the Therapies That Will Work for You. What are the therapies? You're talking about the different emotional types, thin and thick boundaries, and a lot of the different chronic ailments and illnesses that people can suffer, and why certain therapies work better with one personality, if you will, or emotional type than the other. What are the key therapies?
Well, first, Shelley, let me just say that this whole field of what used to be called complementary and alternative medicine and is now known as complementary and integrative health, just because it's hopefully more a part of our healthcare system than it was 10 or 20 years ago. This has been kind of flying under the radar for a while, but more than a third, and I don't know the most current statistics, but certainly more than a third of Americans, as of about 10 or 15 years ago, had spent something like $34 billion overall on these kinds of approaches. So, hypnosis, acupuncture, biofeedback, guided imagery, meditation, yoga. You mentioned naturopathic care, and naturopaths are trained in a variety of different kinds of treatments. And I should say, first and foremost, the importance of sound nutrition and exercise, so-called lifestyle choices that people make, and make very often not knowing the kinds of foods that are ideal for them, and just eating all kinds of unhealthy stuff, which has many consequences. So that's kind of where the naturopaths come from. But you mentioned osteopaths and all, these different therapies are a resource for a lot of people. But by the same token, they're not part of the conventional mainstream medical system quite yet. They're still looked on as somewhat alternative.
Well, what's interesting is a lot of times the insurance doesn't pay for it.
Yes, that's a huge problem, and it's ridiculous when you consider that the return on investment from these treatments is tremendously good. First of all, they tend not to cost a whole lot, and second of all, and the risks are not very high, as with medications, which can cost a fortune and have significant side effects. These treatments typically don't have any or many side effects. So in that sense, they're not really appealing in our economic system for high-priced medicine, which has more than a foothold. And these other treatments, I think, have flown under the radar for a while, but the VA has embraced them. There are at least 18 VA whole health centers across the country, and I think satellite offices that are staffed with folks who know how to implement these therapies, are educated in them. And as I say, the VA is making a strong effort so that just your physicians down the line who may not have the same kind of training, they at least know of the value of these treatments and can direct patients to qualified providers.
Well, certainly people are looking for answers, especially people with chronic pain. Obviously, the opiate crisis that has been talked about so heavily in recent years in the United States, maybe that's fueling some of the direction in the complementary and integrative health area, where insurance companies will start paying for other things besides really heavy opiates.
Yeah, a really good example of that is the head of Aetna Insurance a number of years ago. His name escapes my memory at the moment, but he was involved in a horrific skiing accident. He was all banged up, and a number of surgeries involved, and he was afflicted by chronic pain even after the surgery, to the extent that he did his own research to identify mind-body approaches that would help him. Mm-hmm. And they were so successful for him, not that they completely wiped out the pain, but he was able to modulate the pain to such an extent that he created an effort within Aetna and brought in experts, folks who are familiar with and can teach meditation and guided imagery, and I believe yoga as well, and contracted with them. And Aetna's healthcare costs were significantly reduced for people who enlisted in this program. And then I believe the next step was that he offered it more broadly to Aetna customers. And I'm not sure what they were charged for that or how that figured into the whole Aetna rate structure. But because he personally had experienced significant benefit from meditation and yoga, he wanted to bring those benefits to his employees and then ultimately to Aetna insurance customers.
Interesting. Very wise on his part, and obviously he took the woo-woo out of it, because I think that it was a lot of people think, that's not going to work. That's nah. When in fact, it's very valid.
Well, right, it is valid, and there's no woo to it, to be honest. It's just right. You need to sort of understand the mechanisms involved, and a perfect example of something that sounds woo-woo but it's not, is intuition. People say, well, I have a gut feeling about this or that. And what they may not realize is that there are tons of chemicals and neurotransmitters, they're called, that sort of gravitate between the gut and the brain upstairs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these substances are manufactured. It's called the enteric nervous system, the mind of the gut. People talk now about the microbiome. That's what I'm talking about as well, is a virtual chemical factory down there. And they're constantly transmitting these messages between the brain and the gut and all the other organs of the body, so that when someone has a gut feeling that something's not quite right, or they have an intuition, mm-hmm. That sounds like it doesn't have a tangible basis, but it absolutely does, and we're learning more and more about it. So stuff that was considered woo-woo because it's sort of emotional, or it seems to be kind of intangible, there are actual, tangible reasons why we feel the way we do. And so the different ways that people react to stress has a lot to do with, it's called psychoneuroimmunology, the interplay of the mind and body. And what we're really learning more than anything else, Shelley, I believe the key takeaway is that mind and body are not two different things. Mm-hmm. And so if someone is complaining of symptoms, it's wrong to say, well, that's all in your head, that's psychosomatic. Everything right. is unified. It's mm-hmm. all interconnected, so that a person's complaints, while they could be sort of talked about as primarily psychological or emotional, that has real physical bearings. And so this, I think, is the main takeaway from the kind of research that Marc Micozzi and I have been doing, and a lot of people in a lot of different fields to try and unify our view of what it means to be a human being.
It's rather interesting, yes, because I think that the medical community versus the psychological community, they basically had a great divide there, where the doctors would say, well, yeah, those are psychologists, and they're not medical doctors in case of a psychologist. They don't understand how the body works, and this is not proven what they're doing. I think that kind of orientation kind of evolved since Sigmund Freud and everything else, when in fact there was validity in all of this.
Yeah, people, one of our natural inclinations as human beings is to do what we do and fraternize with people we fraternize with and dismiss those other people that are doing that other stuff over there. And the fact is, we're all human beings, and so MDs are going to suffer from the same chronic conditions that I've mentioned, as acupuncturists, as truck drivers, as fry cooks, as politicians, as teachers, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's a human being, and everybody's constituted the same way. You know, we have brains, we have the rest of our bodies, we have all these vital organs, we have all these chemical messengers that are constantly shooting around between and within us. So it's not that one profession has drawn a bead on everything. Each profession kind of goes at it from its own perspective. The challenge is putting the pieces together and encouraging people to share information and to consider that maybe those other folks over there have a reasonably good point, that they have evidence that they want to bring forward, and not just to think that, you know, we over here have all the answers.
Right, absolutely. Well, human beings tend to be an arrogant lot, and I think there's a lot of that, the ego and the arrogance and everything that keeps everybody from working together, because it's a symbiotic relationship, and if you bring all of that insight together, you're going to have better therapies for people. It just makes sense. So,
right, and the key, that again, what Marc Micozzi and I have brought forward, and this is really what I hope is a major takeaway from our work, is that emotion and what we're feeling, even though we can discount it and say that we're really rational people and a rational species, we're driven by feelings more than anything else. So that what's happening within us is ultra critical. And there's a really good quote that we use in the book. A woman named Paula Reeves, a therapist, said, "When we ignore what matters most to us, it will become the matter within us." And that's really the message of our book, Your Emotional Type, is that regardless of whether you're a thin boundary person or a thick boundary person or somewhere in between, you're feeling different things all the time. You're not necessarily conscious of them all the time. And some of the stuff that you're not conscious about, that energy of those feelings gets transmuted into symptoms of illness. And depending on the kinds of illness, the dozen discomforts we've been talking about, you know, thick and thin boundary people are going to be more susceptible to some of those, and different kinds of treatments are going to be more beneficial for those kinds of people.
I would like to touch on that when we come back. We have to go to break here, Michael. This is fascinating. Michael Jauer, who's co-author of Your Emotional Type, Keys to the Therapies That Will Work for You. This is the Truckers Network radio show on TNC Radio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson. Stay tuned.
This blog on TNC Radio is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. The 5 best truck stops in America. Truck drivers spend days, sometimes weeks, out on the road. Sometimes taking a break at a nice truck stop's a great way to relax and take your mind off driving. There are many truck stops across the United States, but we listed the 5 best truck stops that every trucker needs to stop and experience. Little America, Wyoming. The Little America Truck Stop is located in Little America, Wyoming. It's a mini-chain truck stop with several locations throughout the country for truckers to enjoy. Little America offers a wide variety of services to truck drivers. Some of the services include service truck roadside repair, tire repair, new tires, wheel seals, oil changes, water pumps, brakes, courtesy property shuttle, AC repairs, belts, DOT inspections, and trailer tarp installation. Iowa 80, Walcott, Iowa. Iowa 80 is a place where truckers want to stop. It's the world's largest truck stop, and it's filled with tons of activities and tourist attractions. Truck drivers can stop and enjoy a nice meal, watch a movie, or stop by the trucking museum. Iowa 80 also has a full range of truck services and amenities. Some of the services and amenities include cat scale, chiropractor, convenience store, interstate dental, dog-a-mat, fuel center, laundry facility, library, travel service center, truck-a-mat, and a workout room. South of the border, Hammers, South Carolina. Pedro's Truck Stop, also known as Porky's, located in Hammer, South Carolina, is a world-famous roadside attraction for tourists and truck drivers. Pedro's filled with many different activities, unique foods and shopping. It also offers truck drivers supplies, showers, a trucker's lounge, and 24/7 fresh hot coffee. Trails Travel Center, Albert Lee, Minnesota. Trails Travel Center is everything a truck driver needs and amazing food. Some of the Trails Travel Center's food options are a tavern, Cold Stone Creamery, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and McDonald's. Truckers can also stop and shop heavy-duty truck parts or chrome parts. Trails Travel Center also has a truck service that offers drivers wash services, tire services, wheel alignments, and suspension repair. Jubit's, Portland, Oregon. Jubit's is a family-owned truck stop and boasts of being the world's classiest truck stop. They were also recently named the second-best rest stop in America. Drivers can enjoy a 24-hour full-service Cascade Grill restaurant, a 100-room hotel, movie theater, barber shop, and more. Jubit's also has a truck service center and is committed to providing truck drivers the best tires, truck maintenance, and truck repair. Some of their services include engine diagnostics, oil change, DOT inspection, glass replacement, metal fabrication, welding, tires, tire service, and airbags. Plus, brake service, truck trailer alignment, shock absorbers, air conditioning maintenance, electrical diagnostics, battery service, suspension repair, electronic logging devices, lubricant service, APU installation, and service. This info blog was brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
For the latest in traffic, weather, and information, catch the Morning Grind weekdays right here on tncradio.live. This is the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly, and we've been talking with Michael Jower, who's the co-author of Your Emotional Type, Keys to the Therapies That Will Work for You. What types of therapies typically work better for thin or thick boundary people? I know that we were touching on that, but I was wondering maybe if we could go into more detail, Michael.
Well, I can give you a couple of examples. I mentioned about sort of a hands-on approach versus a visualization approach. The one will benefit thick boundary people more. The latter, the imagery approach will typically benefit thin boundary people, and anything that focuses on relaxation is going to benefit anyone and everyone. But I'll give you, I guess, an example of each. And I'm looking at a chart that Mark and I developed that's in our book that literally shows for each condition the kind of treatment that has the best evidence to help. So a very good example of this is asthma and allergies. And asthma and allergies are typically a thin boundary condition. So if someone takes a boundary quiz and they're on the thin side, they're more likely to suffer from asthma and allergies. My wife's a very good example of this. She's had asthma throughout her life, and she's definitely on the thin side of the spectrum. I mentioned much earlier that feelings don't come as naturally to me, or at least understanding them. So I test out when I take the quiz as being on the thick side. And typically that's the way it works with husbands and wives and partners, is that one person is going to be on one side of the spectrum and the other on the other. So they sort of complement each other in that way, and sometimes drive each other crazy, but that's how it goes. But with asthma and allergies, hypnosis has shown to be really helpful for that. And likewise, eczema, skin condition, which we've shown is characteristic more of thin boundary than thick boundary people. That also does very well with hypnosis. Same thing with irritable bowel syndrome. And there's good evidence behind the efficacy of hypnosis for these conditions. So that's an example of how one type of treatment is going to be beneficial for one particular kind of illness. Now, on the thick boundary side, a good example is hypertension. And hypertension is, like many kinds of conditions, affects a lot of people in this country, and it's sort of progressive. I think It's not like a switch gets flipped and automatically a person becomes hypertense. It happens over a number of years. But our evidence shows that meditation and yoga is exceptionally good to help out people that suffer from hypertension, and biofeedback is also very useful for hypertension. So this is an example of a thick boundary condition and the kinds of treatments that are useful for this kind of condition. And I should say that the guiding philosophy behind our book and our research, Your Emotional Type, is that one size does not fit all. Each of us is a unique person, and the kinds of illnesses that we get are reflective of our emotional style, our emotional type, our biology. You mentioned, Shelley, the question of was it nature or nurture? Well, it's both, and together they make up the kinds of people we become. And so to be more mindful of the way we work emotionally is to open a window on who we are, and that opens the door to more personalized kinds of treatments. Mm-hmm. And the term personalized medicine has been used a lot in recent years, and unfortunately, it's sort of been hijacked by the big pharmaceutical companies that are talking about, targeted treatments based on a person's heredity and the kind of conditions that they have or they're likely to have, and that's okay. There's importance to that, and if it benefits people, and ultimately it will, I'm sure, that's all to the good. But it's not all that personalized medicine should mean. Mm-hmm. And with regard to these kinds of mind-body therapies, these integrative, complementary, if you will, types of treatments, these can be personalized too. And that's what we're trying to bring to people's attention, is that once they're better aware of their own emotional predilections, then they can see the kinds of treatments that are more likely to benefit them and be much, lower cost than some of these high-end treatments that really rely on drugs or ultimately surgery.
And healthier, I would think, than just popping a pill, because then you have side effects from the pills. So, yeah, makes sense. And
the side effects that I'm aware of from these different treatments, these different therapies, for example, meditation or mindfulness-based relaxation, the side effects are all beneficial.
And that's
people
wonderful.
Start to relax. They start to be able to distance themselves a little bit from troublesome habits and thoughts and feelings that they would react very quickly to, and mindfulness becomes much more prominent.
Where can people find your book and information on this? And you said you have a quiz, so people can kind of define whether they're thick or thin-boundaried people, and what therapies and ailments that they would be most prone to. Where does everyone find this information?
It's very simply youremotionaltype.com, and folks can go there and take the quiz online and see where they come out on the boundary spectrum. And I just, again, want to emphasize, it's not that it's, better to be on one side of the spectrum than another. As the French say, vive la différence. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs to respect each other's individuality, and that there are good reasons that we are on the thick or thin boundary side. So it's not pejorative at all. When I do book talks, interestingly enough, and people take the quiz in person, we get to talking about it, folks will often say, well, I feel like I'm a little too thin boundary. How can I become closer to the center? How can I move closer to the center of the spectrum? Likewise, people who are thick boundary will say, I really don't like being as thick as I am now that we're talking about this. What can I do to become a little bit thinner? So I think the first step is to just understand that there is this spectrum, mm-hmm. and to look at the kinds of conditions that people are more susceptible to, and understand the concept of feelings as energy, and that energy can kind of get stuck and do weird things to us, sure, and kind of make life difficult, cause all kinds of aches and pains and stressors. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be that way, and understanding that the validity of your feelings and the centrality of your feelings to your everyday life is key to health in our estimation.
I appreciate this insight, Michael. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I definitely hope that our drivers check out what you have, because I think it's going to be extremely helpful. You're listening to...
Can I just mention just one other website, and I neglected, and I apologize, Shelley, but if folks go to the VA website, va.gov/whole health, because the VA has begun to embrace the same approach. And there's more than meets the eye at the VA. So it's va.gov/whole health, and that's a good starting point.
You're listening to
agency.
TNCRadio.live, Houston,
Thank you so
Texas.
much, Michael.
This
Appreciate
station
it
is
very
owned
much.
and operated by MSICO LLC, a privately held Texas corporation.
Thanks so much for listening to this podcast. For more information regarding our podcast, reuse, copyrights, etc., please visit our website, www.tncradio.live.